When you said you knew, what's his name, Charles Dance
Mm-hmm.
from Game of Thrones?
Well, and Alien 3.
Okay, where I recognized him from was the Ali G movie, Ali G in the House.
Oh my god.
I'm like, hey, it's the Deputy Prime Minister from Ali G. Welcome to Screens of the Stone Age, the podcast where scientists review movies about prehistoric people. My name is Josh Lindell. I'm a grad student studying Neanderthal teeth, and I'm here with...
I'm Dr. Kimberly Plomp. I am a bioarchaeologist. I study the human skeleton, health and disease, and human evolution.
And I'm Dr. Ross Barnett, a specialist in ancient DNA and Pleistocene megafauna.
And today we're reviewing a short film called Chrono-Perambulator. This is by far the shortest film that we've ever covered. It's less than 11 minutes. But for some reason, I decided we were going to do a full episode on this one. It might end up being one of our shortest episodes as well, but I think we've got a few things we could talk about in this one. But before we get into it, just to pad the runtime of our episode a little bit, I think I would like to do the thing that we always forget to do, which is to thank our audience and ask them to share our podcast and like us and give us reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and stuff like that. Because if you're the type of listener who clicked on a podcast episode titled Chrono-Perambulator, you are a true fan of this podcast. So thanks for listening and tell your friends about us. Anyway, who wants to summarize this short film?
I don't know. Who did the last one? Was it me?
I think it was you, yeah. I really enjoyed it. So it starts out, like the start is very old-timey, like a black and white, one of those movies that does it by like shots, right? Like at the very beginning of motion pictures.
Like a silent film?
Yeah, so I wasn't quite sure where it was going with that. And this man, in the beginning, he's making like this machine that then blows up and then someone runs away with an arm. So it seems like someone's blown up and then someone's stolen the arm. I don't know. It was strange. And then I was like, Josh, he did it again, right? and then it opens up to a movie. And so it opens up to a scientist who is very much like the idea of a mad scientist. So he's got these weird glasses, one with a dark lens, one with just a clear lens, and he has a hook for a hand for no apparent reason.
No, because he lost his arm in the explosion.
It was his arm that got blown off.
Oh, is that what that is? Oh, okay. It all comes together. Right. Okay. So yeah, so he lost his arm in the explosion. But so this rich guy reads the newspaper and it says that there is this archaeological find. And we saw some guy find oh, I'm doing this so badly. We saw a man digging what looked like a grave. I don't know if we're supposed to assume he's an archaeologist, but it looks like he's just digging a grave. And then he finds a human cranium. And then it goes to a shot of a rich man buying a paper, and the paper says it was an amazing find. And so the reason why the archaeological find is amazing is because it is a Neolithic burial, Neolithic site. So they estimated that it was 6,000 years old, but it was found with a piece of metal, like a piece of like a metal piping. And so it was supposed to then put the idea of the Metal Age way back into the Neolithic, which is the new Stone Age, which would be absolutely crazy and so excited, like it would revise everything that we thought about the evolution of technology and industries. So then the scientist with the time machine says, well, we could go back in time and actually see what's happening because I've built this time machine. And the rich guy's like, okay, fine, that sounds like a good idea. And then they bring this other guy, this poor guy gets brought just as a witness. And I don't think he wanted to go or anything. They just kind of grabbed it. Oh, Ross, we have matching nails.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yours are slightly neater than mine.
We both have black nail polish on, chipped black nail polish. So three of them go back in time. The scientist, the rich man, and the poor sap who just got pulled in as a witness for some reason. And they go into the time machine and they zap back into the Neolithic at the same time. So it was one of those time machines that stays at the same location, right? So all of a sudden they're in the Neolithic and they're surrounded by a tribe of Neolithic people. And the tribe of Neolithic people kind of circle them, and the people start trying to talk to them, and they do the silly thing of like, we mean you no harm, with like hand gestures that don't mean anything, just really loudly and slowly, as if that's going to communicate to these people who are not going to speak modern English. Or so then it becomes apparent pretty quickly that the Neolithic people are not too happy with these, what probably to them looks like aliens that have just appeared out of nowhere in this big weird looking machine. And so they get brutally killed pretty quickly. And then the scene goes into the Neolithic people like wearing their clothes, playing with the equipment, like they've taken apart the machine and they're just like playing around with everything, and they're kind of being funny, like trying to mimic making fun of the guys, and like it was really funny. And so then the idea is that the piece of metal that they found in the Neolithic site is from the time machine, and so it's like this circular argument where they found the time machine because they went back in time, and they went back in time because they found a piece of the time machine. And it just keeps going and going and going. You can't think that far into it, else your mind will melt. And then it ends. It was really cute. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked it because, I like time travel stuff, but it's so hard to get it right. And this is a perfect closed loop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the twist wasn't really that original, I guess, but it was fun. It was concise. If it was like a longer movie, you would have figured it out way too early. But because it was only 11 minutes long, the twist is happening at the same time you realize what the twist is, you know?
Yeah. And then it's just enjoyable with the people like wearing the clothes and making fun of them. And like, it was just, it was funny.
It was
I
good.
liked it.
And some great actors in it as well. Charles Dance, Tywin Lannister himself.
Yeah, I was like, isn't that dude?
Yeah.
Like, what's he doing in this?
Isn't that guy from that thing?
Yeah.
And also Bill Patterson.
And in the background, there was a shot of a woman. I didn't go back to it, but she looked like she was familiar too. It might have been one of her first roles or something. I don't know who it was.
Okay. But Bill Patterson's great as well. He's been in everything, like Doctor Who and Fleabag. He's in. He's the voice of the repair shop, if you guys watch that on the iPlayer. But yeah, no, it was great, well acted. And yeah, like Josh was saying, it's a nice closed loop story, which are fairly difficult to do, I think, in a way that's recursive but not illogical.
Yeah.
It's quite hard to do without getting into the kind of grandfather paradox, the idea that, if you go back in time and do something, that's going to prevent you from doing it in the future. But this one worked quite nicely. And I don't know about you guys, but I kind of twigged what was going to be the twist just about when Teddy Knox, the mad scientist, when he rocks up to the archaeological site with his time machine, it's like, right, here's what's going to happen. The three bodies that are in the ground and the bit of metal are going to be three guys from now and the bit of time machine. But that was fine.
Unfortunately, there's only about 5 minutes left in the whole thing at that point.
Yeah.
And there are still some good bits coming up of them taking the piss out of the guys they just brutally murdered.
Yeah. And that poor guy who just got pulled in as a witness, like he wanted nothing to do with it. He didn't even approach the people. Like when they both, like the rich man and the scientist, got out of the machine and approached the people to talk to him, the other guy just stayed in the machine and was like, "This is not a good idea."
Yeah.
I think he was the reporter, wasn't he? So it kind of made sense that he should be the one who was selected.
Yeah, less sympathy for him now.
Well, anyway, it's a short film, but do we have any scientific inaccuracies or mistakes that we can pick apart?
Well, first of all, I was impressed that they got the timing of the Neolithic right. So they say these are Neolithic people, older than the pyramids, about 6,000 years ago, and that ties in pretty well with, I guess, sort of middle Neolithic, I would say, in Britain. So it's set in Ireland, which is interesting. I don't know much, but I think the Neolithic of Ireland's fairly expansive. You've got sites like big famous ones whose name are escaping me at the minute. Newgrange, Newgrange, a fantastic kind of Neolithic chamber tomb, and all sorts of really fascinating sites there. And so, definitely there's Neolithic people in Ireland. They get the time period that they mention right, which not every film we've watched does. The Neolithic people themselves, don't look particularly Neolithic. They don't look particularly dressed for, Irish springtime or summer or winter or whenever it was supposed to be that they turn up. So they're kind of in caveman furs, which we know by the Neolithic people would have had, fitted, well-made, sewn clothes that would have.
Yeah, these guys were just the regular small fur vest and loincloths.
The Raquel Welch 1 million years BC school of sartorial design. And also, I think the weapons they had weren't
one of them was a
Neolithic.
trident.
Yeah. But wooden, we don't know. They might have had wooden tridents.
Yeah.
But
I guess so, yeah. The stone points weren't
stuff,
Neolithic, though.
No, they weren't. What would you expect? Like really well-made, nice, small microlith sort of stuff? Is that what you would expect for kind of Neolithic?
I think so. You would have probably bows and arrows, or I think for reference, Otzi is around the same age, isn't he? So we can probably imagine, similar style of clothes, similar style of tools.
Yeah, he's a bit later because he's metal, isn't he? He's got he's kind of Copper Age. Yeah,
like Chalcolithic, like late Neolithic, early Copper Age, I think, right?
Yeah.
So he has a copper axe head. But he was also shot with a stone arrow head, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd probably also expect polished stone tools. Those are kind of fairly common in Neolithic. The kind of beautifully made, hundreds of hours spent maces and hammer stones that have been sanded to a kind of fine polish with grit. Yeah, not like, I mean, what would you say that they were, that they had? It looked kind of like sort of middle Paleolithic kind of crude spear points.
I would say they had sort of Hollywood spear points that didn't really look like there was much intention into their construction.
Yes.
Kind of rough, pointy stones.
Yeah.
Yeah, just what they thought looked cool.
Here's an archaeological thing. It's a nice tight loop. The time machine gets destroyed. There's a standing stone that this is all happening around. I don't know if we mentioned that, but there's a standing stone with some stick figures carved into it, standing around a circle, which ends up being the actual time machine. So it's like the Neolithic people have carved this event into the standing stone. But the time machine shows up right beside the standing stone, and the two archaeologists, or the archaeologist and the mad scientist, get out and walk towards the people, and they're killed where they're standing there a few meters away from the standing stone. And then the reporter is killed in the time machine right beside the standing stone, and then the time machine is disassembled and destroyed by these guys, right?
Yeah.
And this is exactly where all of them are found by the archaeologists later, right where they lay. And that wouldn't happen archaeologically if you have if you have an animal that dies in an open field, which is where this was, bones are going to get scattered all around the place, and they're probably not going to preserve for thousands of years anyway. The only way it would happen is if these Neolithic people buried them in the exact spot where they killed them, which I think is unlikely.
Well, that's what I thought happened, because the stone was visible, was above the ground at the first scene when they were digging, right?
Yeah.
So if the stone, so the person was quite far under, so the stone would be far under too, right?
Yeah.
Because they would have been at the same surface.
There's no change in the height of the standing stone from when they see it in
so that
the
means
Neolithic.
that the person was put underneath the ground, so it would have been intentional burial.
It would have to have been.
Yeah.
But why would they bury them in the exact positions where they were killed? Because they were found. They specifically noted where the bodies were found. Two of them were found a few meters away from the standing stone, and one was found closer to it, and that's exactly where they died. So I think this is just the filmmaker not really thinking it through how this would work archaeologically.
You definitely wouldn't take the time to dig a 6-foot deep grave to bury 3 strangers like that, right? If that was in your living area, you might move them away so that they're not rotting in among where you are.
Plus, the wolves would get them, or the bears. That's not, you don't have to worry about them staying around and making a mess. The kind of natural house cleaners of the Neolithic of Ireland would have taken advantage of a free meal.
Yeah, but you'd still want to put it away from you, because you wouldn't want the those
True.
animals will be coming near you for
True.
food.
Yeah.
But yeah, you wouldn't put in the effort of digging 6 feet down, 3 graves 6 feet down is either you're trying to hide the bodies or it's an act of love and respect, right?
There's also some scientific jargon that's a little funny, and I think this might have been intentionally as a joke, but when the archaeologist from the guys from the British Museum, right? When he shows up and the archaeologist there is showing him around, he's showing them the skeletons, and he says their cranial casings have been shattered.
Yeah.
And then they do the that trope where it's like, in English, please, right? So he says their cranial casings have been shattered. He says, I'm sorry. And then he says their heads have been bashed in, probably by axes.
Yeah.
And of course, cranial casings is kind of a nonsense because the cranium is the casing. So it's not like you'd never call a skull a cranial casing. It's just a weird way to say it.
No, I'd assume that it was a box that Crania was in.
Right. But that might have been tongue-in-cheek. Like, they might have been making up fake nonsense science words for the sake of the joke, you know?
Yeah. I really liked how over the top they made the scientist guy.
Yeah, there's some nice kind of writing with the scientists. So, like, when he turns up with the Chrono-Perambulator, and the guy asks him if it works, and he says, "Of course it works," while he's scratching his face with his hook hand.
Yeah. See, I didn't get that at first. I just like, that's a joke I just got now.
Yeah,
because I didn't get the whole he blew up his hand thing.
And there's nice interaction between the farmer whose field the standing stone is in, where they're doing all this archaeology. And they basically kind of dug up everything around the standing stone, and just as they're about to go back in time in the machine, he kind of rocks up drunk and goes, "You ruined this field, you English bastard," which is a fairly, that's a reasonable complaint, I think, for an Irish farmer's field in 1919.
Yeah.
I think that's probably still
it's
something that would be on farmers' minds.
Yeah. Evergreen.
Yeah.
During my undergrad, I had an assignment where I had to find some primary archaeological source and write a report on it. And most people were like writing about stylistic changes in gravestones or something. But I got connected to this farmer that thought he might have a burial mound or something on his property, which is a kind of thing that we have in this area, not very commonly and not very well known. But he let me go take a look at it without, well, of course I couldn't dig because I was an undergrad student. I didn't have a permit or anything, but on the condition that I'm writing an undergrad report and nothing beyond that, because he didn't want anybody to get the idea that there was something archaeological. Even though it was just in the bush, it wasn't even in a field or anything. But he didn't want to risk particularly in Canada, the chance that they might find human burials on his land, because then it becomes a whole big issue.
Yeah.
So even today, farmers are worried about that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. And certainly that's historically that's been an issue in Scotland as well. And there's still quite a few, even reasonably famous archaeological sites that are still on private land. And yeah, it can be a bit messy in terms of like visitation rights and things like that. But yeah, have we exhausted the Chrono-Perambulator?
No, I got a few things that we can talk about. We got some tangents we can go on here. Okay. One of the things that we can talk about are ooparts. Do you know what ooparts are?
I do. Out-of-place artifacts.
Yeah, so that's basically what this film is about. You found an artifact that shouldn't be in the place where you have it, and you have to make interpretations about that. Usually, you hear about ooparts in the context of conspiracy theorists and ancient aliens and stuff like that.
Creationists love a oopart.
Do you know any examples of ooparts, real or otherwise debunked?
Yeah. So, I mean, the one we mentioned, I think, last time about the Carson City jail footprints, so like giant sloth footprints. There's a famous one, I can't remember the exact name, but it's essentially a metallic hammer in what's claimed to be a kind of lump of coal, which obviously would be massively out of place. Other ones I've heard of are in the Cabway cranium, so the held in the Natural History Museum in London from, I think, Zambia. It's Homo something or other, one of the early homos, and it's got an abscess in the sort of side of the skull, which is almost perfectly circular, and it's been claimed by various people that it's a bullet hole, which is interesting. What other ones have you got?
Would Piltdown Man be one?
Yeah, Piltdown Man could count as one. There's sort of different classes of them. So that hammer you're talking about is called the London Hammer from London, Texas. That's the one that my brain goes to first because it's really cool to look at. It's a metal hammerhead with a wooden handle that is embedded in a rock, and the first time you see it, you're like, wow, how did that happen? It's a Cretaceous limestone that it's embedded in. But they did a carbon dating on the wooden handle, and it came back inconclusive, less than 700 years, I think, because like what's the lower range of carbon dating where it's actually... where it can actually be performed?
200, I think.
I don't know.
So yeah, like carbon dating has a range, but if it's too young or too old, you can't get a proper date out of it. So basically, it's too young to date properly, and the style of the metal head is exactly the same as like 19th century American hammers. But the limestone is apparently Cretaceous limestone. So the best explanation they have for it is that the sort of calcification has occurred over top of the hammer, like it was put in a well or something where there was like flowing water and it deposited calcium over, like calcite, whatever, over top of it.
Absolutely. And I think this is a really interesting thing to sort of ruminate on, because when you sort of see it, it's there. It's like a real thing. You can see pictures of it, photos of it, and your mind goes, "What? How on earth could that be possible?" But then you kind of do a bit more digging. You kind of, if you have to read a geology textbook, and you realize, well, rocks to the layperson are totally static. Once they're formed, that's it. But that's not the reality. Rocks are, they're not permanent. They're temporary. Like things like limestone. The reason why you get stalactites and stalagmites and all these kind of things is because it's fairly easy to kind of turn limestones into liquid solutions and then precipitate them out again. And you have like cases of famous petrifying wells or petrifying streams where people would just like chuck stuff and then come back a couple of weeks later and it'd be covered in a layer of limestone because the concentration in the water, the stream or whatever is so high that when it comes into contact with some kind of nucleating surface, like something that it can adhere to, then it just sort of comes out of solution onto the object. And so it's a really, I think it gives us a bit of an insight into how brains work, how kind of we reconcile new information, or how we try not to reconcile new information or new anomalies that we kind of come across.
Another sort of different example of a new part, which we've mentioned before, is the Antikythera mechanism from Greece. It's
I was thinking that.
Yeah, it's this complex geared machine that they found on a shipwreck in the early 1900s. And it's sometimes you can consider it an OOPArt because there's nothing else like it that we've ever found. And so when they found it, they just didn't really know what to think about it because it didn't match the kind of technology they thought that they had in ancient Greece. But now we understand it is a real ancient Greek artifact, and it just tells us that what we understood about ancient Greece at the time was wrong, and so it seemed out of place because we didn't have the full picture. But then after studying it, we realized that we know something different, or the past was different than we thought we knew it.
Yeah.
So like OOPArts can be all different kinds of things. They can be real ancient artifacts that, just tell us something we didn't know about the past, or they can be fakes or misunderstandings about things that aren't actually old, but we think they are. They can be a lot of different things. Or in the case of the Cobway skull, bullet hole, just a wild imagination, I guess.
Yeah.
We should say the Cobway skull is probably 500,000 years old, or 300,000 years old or something like that, which is why it's ridiculous to think that there could be a bullet hole in it.
Yeah. But, these are the kind of things that as a kind of scientist I've come across when reading kind of creationist literature. And it sort of, it tells you about the kind of way that non-scientific worldviews view kind of evidence. that it tends to usually just be presented and say, look, here's the London Hammer, a metal object in Carboniferous coal. Therefore, everything we know about the history of life on Earth is wrong. Therefore, you should read your Old Testament. That's where it is. And there's multiple kind of logical fallacies from there. First of all, is that, like we're saying, that it's a real object, but is what they're saying right? Is it actually in a lump of coal, or is it in a lump of limestone? That's something you need to investigate. Often people will just read something and take it at face value if it chimes with their own worldview. Second thing is, do we have an explanation? Science, as we all kind of recognize from working in academia, is all about changing our ideas when we're confronted with new evidence. I mean, that's what it is. That's what we have to do. When you kind of hear stories about, people saying, oh, but they've got giants hidden in the Smithsonian, or, oh, but they say that bumblebees can't fly according to the laws of science, then that you just sort of think, yeah, whatever, that's bullshit. Nothing science loves more than something unexplained or unknown. That's the kind of stuff that we thrive on.
Mm-hmm.
We would love there to be kind of giant skeletons. I mean, what would that tell us? But we would love for all these kind of weird things to be real. But unfortunately, when we kind of use the scientific approach, which is to investigate the claims, to look at explanations for them, then what usually happens is we sort of change our understanding. That's how it should be.
Yeah. Doesn't Tim Minchin say that? Oh God, I just had it. This is the problem with doing this podcast so late, is my brain just is dead.
Was it the science doesn't know all the answers?
No, it's like Scooby-Doo, where everything that you think is magic ends up to just not be magic.
Yeah.
When you look closer at it.
And what really annoys me about when creationists or whatever kind of theological sect uses these kind of arguments is that, well, let's say that, for instance, that we do have a metal hammer from the Carboniferous, like with the London Hammer. That has absolutely nothing to say about the validity or not of your religious worldview. Like, there's no way you can go from metal objects in the Carboniferous to, for example, Jesus being the Son of God, who lived in the Middle East 2,000 years ago. So they're kind of trying to use kind of brain hacks to kind of just shut down your critical thinking and take their authority as read. That just really annoys me.
Well, on that note, we can also talk about ancient aliens a little bit, because I don't know if we mentioned it, but the reason this mad scientist wants to go back to the origin of these artifacts is because he thinks that aliens are responsible for leaving these artifacts. He thinks that aliens visited these Neolithic peoples, and that's what evidence we're looking at here. And so the film is set in 1919, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We tend to think of Ancient Aliens as a modern phenomenon, since the show Ancient Aliens started in like 2011, and it's based on von Daniken's book from 1960, 1969, 1967, something like that. But there was a lot of science fiction about Ancient Aliens around the turn of the century, and if Wikipedia is correct, the first science fiction author to credit aliens with building the pyramids and the Sphinx was an author named Garrett P. Serviss, who wrote a book called Edison's Conquest of Mars, which was an unofficial sequel to an unofficial adaptation of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. Apparently, I don't know if my details on this are correct, but it seems like maybe there was a sort of serialized American version of War of the Worlds. And so anyway, Edison's Conquest of Mars is a sequel where Thomas Edison, who was a common hero in these turn-of-the-century science fiction stories, they called them Edisonades or something like that, I think.
Okay.
Basically, Thomas Edison creates some sort of death ray and also spaceships and spacesuits, and they put together a team of scientists, and they fly to Mars to fight the Martians and
this is basically
avenge
like
Earth.
The 19th century equivalent of the Elon Musk fanboys that you get now. Who are like, isn't it? It's essentially the same kind of thing. Like they've kind of glommed onto this supposedly maverick genius inventor. Although with Edison and definitely with Musk, that's very much debatable. yes, they were fantastic capitalists, but did they actually invent all that much rather than just take credit for it? Yeah. So, and then you get all the fanboys saying, yeah, well, let's write a story about him going to Mars.
You have just put the terrifying idea into my head that Elon Musk fan fiction must exist.
Oh, God.
Oh, it must exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll do my best to find some Elon Musk fan fiction.
Please
and maybe we'll do
don't.
that for a future episode.
Please don't. The cringe would kill us.
Anyway, in this story, Edison's conquest of Mars, basically they have some space battles against Martians. They finally get to Mars and they win because Thomas Edison is smarter than Martians who are already advanced enough to fly to Earth. But apparently there's a race of giants that lives on Mars, and they traveled to Earth 9,000 years ago and abducted some humans who were still living as slaves on Mars, who they rescued, but also they were responsible for building the pyramids and the Sphinx. And the Sphinx is built in the image of the aliens. And it seems like this might be the first science fiction story to draw this connection between aliens and the pyramids. But it was science fiction. Nobody believed this was true at the time.
Everything else in the story is so crazy, like such an imagination, right? And like go wild with fiction. That's fantastic. And then somehow it's turned into this weird movement where people think like that it's true. And imagine what the author thinks, well, he'd be like 100 years from now, they're going to be doing all this amazing stuff. And you're like 100 years from now, they're going to think what you wrote is real.
Yeah.
It even happened in their lifetimes because stories like this from the 1800s inspired authors like H.P. Lovecraft, who we don't really think of him as like ancient aliens, but his work is all about ancient aliens. It's about these ancient monsters that were dormant that came from other planets, and they used to rule over ancient Earth, and they're associated with even the most famous story of his, Call of the Cthulhu, features archaeology, or maybe the character is an archaeologist or something like that.
And Uparts, essentially, features the little Cthulhu statuette.
But even in his lifetime, as he was writing these stories, fans would write into him and ask him, how do you know all this? Is this real? And he's like, what the fuck are you talking about? This is fiction.
I'm pretty sure that people still try and find, Miskatonic University and ask various kind of New England universities if they can see their copy of the Necronomicon. I'm pretty sure that still happens, for sure.
Yeah. I worked at a bookstore and people would come in and ask where the Da Vinci Code was. And so I'd bring them to like the Dan Brown, like the B section of fiction. They're like, this should be in religion. And I'm like, no, it's fiction. And they're like, no, it's not. And I'm like, Dan Brown. And then I like showed them all the other novels that he's written that are obviously fiction. They'd get so like, they'd just huff away. You're like,
they thought it was a nonfiction written in like a narrative, though.
I think so. Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah, it was weird. And it multiple times. Like I was like, this is not, and I hadn't read it or watched the movie or anything yet. I was like, what's going on with this book?
It's so bad.
Yeah.
Such a terrible book. Like I don't think I've ever been in a charity bookshop that's not had at least several copies of a Dan Brown novel, because people like read them and then thought this is absolute horseshit and then just gave it to the nearest charity shop.
Yeah.
One thing that I don't think we mentioned, but it's kind of carrying on from what Josh was saying about the standing stone that's kind of at the center of the story, which has these supposedly Neolithic carvings on it of the arrival of the time machine. One thing that's not generally known, but I think is quite cool, is that most standing stones would have had essentially kind of Neolithic graffiti and stuff on it. And some of them you can still see it, especially if they've been kind of recumbent for a long time. So I think there's a few stones at Stonehenge, definitely some of the Orcadian standing stones have like, Iron Age graffiti of axe heads, usually, is what they kind of like to carve onto these stones. So you can see some real kind of ancient graffiti on these massive stones from that time period. I think they've done like, what is it called? Photogrammetry on some of the Stonehenge sarcens and stones, and found the very faint remains, because of course over the past 3,000 years of British weather, that tends to kind of knock them off the outside. But if you imagine back in the day, they would have been, covered with the kind of Iron Age equivalent of I was here.
I was here, yeah.
One of my favorite graffiti facts is how the Romans used to like drawing penises on everything.
Yeah.
Who doesn't? I mean, that's not just a Roman thing.
And in the Tower of London, they have, people scratching stuff on the walls and writing stuff on the walls.
There's some great ones in Orkney. So we went on a trip to Orkney involved with some postdoc work I did, a decade plus now, years ago. And Maze How is like a Neolithic chambered cairn, but it was broken into by Vikings in the kind of 12th, 13th century when they were in Orkney as well. And they left graffiti all over it, which is fantastic. So some of it is, gives you an insight into kind of Viking life. So it's, Harold shagged Hilda here. But other ones are really funny. Like there's way up right at the top of the chambered cairn, there's a graffiti that says something like Thorin wrote this up high. Just like a kind of meta joke about the graffiti. Yeah, I love ancient graffiti. It's so interesting. You get kind of insights into everyday people's lives. I think Pompeii's got quite a lot as well, which is usually quite graphic.
Yeah, and it's just interesting because it also just shows that people are still the same.
Exactly,
right? Like the jokes are still the same.
Everyone just likes to draw a penis. That hasn't changed.
Yeah.
I actually talk about graffiti a little bit in some of my courses because, if it was written in Pompeii or, on medieval standing stones or something, when we discover that, we try and preserve it because it's a window into the past. But if it's written on, the back of my building, then, they want to sandblast over it and they want to try and catch people who are doing it and punish them for it. So it's funny to think about how we see the past differently from how we see the present.
Absolutely. It's like, that Indiana Jones scene where he's going to get chucked into the Well of Souls, I think it is. And Belloc talks about this watch that he got from the flea market in Cairo for like $1. It's totally useless, totally worthless. But if I throw it in and leave it for 1,000 years, it'll become priceless. And I think it's the same with graffiti.
Yeah. At what point does litter become something interesting, right?
Absolutely. At what point does grave robbing become archaeology?
Would say if it's longer than 50 years for that.
All right. Okay.
Well, that's the number for forensics, I think, right? If it's younger than 50 years, then it's of legal interest. But if it's older than 50 years, it's archaeology.
Okay.
But I think if you have a cemetery that is still managed that's older than 50 years, you can't actually just dig up those graves that are dated to before 1973. Is that what we are talking about?
What we're saying now.
So if you do it,
you can just go dig up any graves that were buried before 1973 and just say, don't worry, I'm an archaeologist.
But then it would be more like treasure hunting. I don't know. Does the body have to be fresh for it to be grave robbing?
No, because I think there's a market for human skeletons as well. So,
but is that grave robbing or is that
would be grave robbing? I would imagine. I'm sure, apart from the age stipulation, probably also if it still has a headstone, then it's grave robbing.
Yeah.
Do we know why this film was commissioned? Like, was it part of a series or was it a one-off? Or
I really couldn't find anything about this film. There's not a lot to go on IMDb. The director and writer is Damien O'Donnell, who has done a small number of other things. There's a pretty big gap of about 8 years during the 2000s where it doesn't seem like he did anything. I was hoping, Ross, maybe you were more familiar being in the UK, since maybe this was played more locally, but I'm not familiar with anything else he did.
I never heard of it before, and so I did a little bit of digging. I couldn't find anything particularly of relevance. It's not something I ever heard about. I mean, that's not really how films are shown in the UK, even back in the 90s, back in my youth. You would never really see a 10-minute film in the cinema. It would have to be something that was maybe for TV or for video or something. I don't know.
Or a film festival, maybe?
Yeah, for a film festival, perhaps.
In Canada, we have the National Film Board, and on CBC, at least when I was younger, I don't watch actual TV these days, but whenever they had, several minutes in between shows, they'd put some sort of independent short films on. I remember Kim, do you remember the Cat Came Back cartoon? They used to always end up on TV when they had like 5 minutes to fill with the Fred Penner song.
Yeah. I haven't thought about that since the last time I saw it.
Speaking of which, there's a very short, like 2-minute vignette from National Film Board of Canada about woolly mammoths that's on our list that I want to figure out how to do at some point, but I don't know how we'd ever do a 2-minute video.
Well, we're up to 50 minutes on this.
Yeah. Who'd have thought?
So, yeah.
We might be kind of rambling at this point. We're talking about National Film Board of Canada, but
it looks like I've just been doing some digging while you guys have been chatting. It looks like it was maybe commissioned by Channel 4, one of the 5 terrestrial channels we have in the UK. So it looks like it maybe got played on Channel 4 at some point in the past. And they're kind of like an artsy, I don't know what the American Canadian equivalent would be, but it's funded by advertising, but kind of has a remit to produce kind of quality output. So it's got a good reputation for quizzes and comedy as well. Channel 4.
Probably PBS would be the equivalent for
possibly. Because it's not like the BBC channels, which are funded by a license fee, and it's not like ITV and Channel Y, which are funded by advertising but are dross.
Well, what are our final thoughts on Chrono-Perambulator then?
It is worth the 11 minutes, I think. You will not regret it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with Kim that 11 minutes, it doesn't waste any time, I think. It's enjoyable, it's funny, well acted, and it's a nice little interesting piece of time travel fiction, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have put a spoiler warning at the top since there's a twist to it, but whatever. Everyone knows that we're going to spoil this show.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like this one. I love a perfect time loop. I like that about it. It's short enough that it doesn't, the twist doesn't really matter because you don't have to like wait it out being like, I already know what's going to happen.
Yeah. And I can't think of many other films that do a closed time loop that's really as kind of succinct as that. I guess. Have you guys seen Looper? That's kind of all about.
No.
That's all about kind of closing time loops and stuff, but it's a bit messy and doesn't totally make sense.
I think I might have started that one and then got frustrated. Was that with Joseph Gordon-Levitt?
That's the one, yeah, and Bruce Willis.
Yeah, I think something about it I didn't like, and I stopped after about 15 minutes.
Yeah. 12 Monkeys, I think, does a closed time loop pretty well. Have you seen 12 Monkeys?
I have not.
Okay.
No.
Right.
Futurama has a perfect time loop in Roswell that ends well, except that it has a paradox.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite episodes. I just love the bit when they find Zoidberg. Hello. Brilliant.
I haven't seen it.
Oh, you got to check it out. Any other time loop films that anyone could think of? Primer, perhaps. And that's one that boggles the mind, so I can't really tell if it's a perfect time loop or not, because I never managed to totally figure it out.
Oh, the movie I can never remember the name of, but it was adapted from a Robert Heinlein story called All You Zombies. Maybe that's Primer. I can't remember what it's called.
What happens in it?
It's some sort of time travel agent from the future comes back and talks to... I don't know. It's too complicated, but you can find this story online. I don't want to spoil this one because it's a pretty tight time loop. Maybe medically doesn't quite make a lot of sense, but everything closes up in the end. And I really liked reading it when I was younger. They adapted it into a movie and they added some extra stuff to it, which I thought was going to make it not work, but somehow they extended this time loop and added more loops to it, and it still worked. But I still think the short story is better than the movie. I'll see if I can remember the name of the movie and put it in the show notes. But
is that it?
That's the one. Predestination.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've not seen that one.
Read the story though.
Source Code, I think, is also another time loop, a recent time loop film, which I thought was not bad. Edge of Tomorrow, another time loop film. I think I'm getting the impression I've been watching a lot more films than you guys.
You guys have been watching a lot of time loop films, is what I got to say.
Oh, well.
Maybe we'll start a side podcast where we just review time loop films.
And it's just the same review over and over again.
What you'd have to do is do like one episode which leads to the other one, another movie that which leads to the other movie, and then it kills back around and it just continuously does that, right?
Perfect, yeah.
If you've been enjoying Screens of the Stone Age, get in touch with us. Follow us on Twitter at SOTSA_podcast and on Facebook at SOTSA podcast, or send us an email to screensofthestoneage@gmail.com. Screens of the Stone Age is supported by the Paleoanthropological Society of Canada. Find out more at pasc-scpa.ca.